everyone, and welcome to class. Today we're looking at the internal generated revenue by the 36 states in Nigeria, including the FCT, for the year 2023. Over the last couple of weeks, we started a series reviewing the monthly allocations received by these states from the Federation Account Allocation Committee. And today we're saying we have seen how much you all collect from one source of revenue. But can we ask you, these are our beloved states, how much do you actually generate by yourselves and for yourself? That's why it's called internal generated revenue. Now, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, this is how much all the states in Nigeria were able to generate in the year 2023. If you notice the contrast between our series from the monthly allocations received by these states from the Federation Account Allocation Committee, those are monthly allocations. But here, every single figure you see here is how much, the totality of how much each state was able to generate in a year. Now you go and compare side by side how much they could generate in a year versus how much they receive in a month. Now let's run through real quick. Abia State, 23.73 billion. Abia State was able to generate the sum of 23.7 billion in the year 2023. Adamawa State was able to generate 17.07 billion naira. Akwa Ibom State was able to generate the sum of 43.18 billion naira. Anambra State was able to generate the sum of 33.46 billion naira. Bauchi State was able to generate the sum of 30.58 billion naira. Bayelsa State was able to generate the sum of 19.82 billion naira. Benue State generated the sum of 19.12 billion naira. Borno State generated the sum of 19.58 billion naira. Cross River State generated approximately the sum of 31.56 billion naira. Delta State generated approximately the sum of 114.09 billion naira. Ebonyi State generated approximately the sum of 30.84 billion naira. Edo State generated approximately the sum of 64.87 billion naira. Ekiti State generated approximately the sum of 32.10 billion naira. Enugu State generated approximately the sum of 33.86 billion naira. The Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, generated approximately the sum of 211.10 billion naira. Gombe State generated approximately the sum of 15.18 billion naira. Imo State generated approximately the sum of 21.05 billion naira. Jigawa State generated approximately the sum of 27.54 billion naira. Kaduna State generated approximately the sum of 62.49 billion naira. Kano State generated approximately the sum of 37.38 billion naira. Katsina State generated approximately the sum of 26.96 billion naira. Kebbi State generated approximately the sum of 11.74 billion naira. Kogi State generated approximately the sum of 26.78 billion naira. Kwara State generated approximately the sum of 59.64 billion naira. Lagos State generated approximately the sum of 815.86 billion naira. Nasarawa State generated approximately the sum of 23.498 billion naira. Niger State generated approximately the sum of 21.68 billion naira. Ogun State generated approximately the sum of 146.88 billion naira. Ondo State generated approximately the sum of 41.50 billion naira. Osun State generated approximately the sum of 27.93 billion naira. Plateau State generated approximately the sum of 25.84 billion naira. Rivers State generated approximately the sum of 195.41 billion naira. Sokoto State generated approximately the sum of 17.96 billion naira. Taraba State generated approximately the sum of 10.87 billion naira. Yobe State generated approximately the sum of 11.19 billion naira, and Zamfara State generated approximately the sum of 22.16 billion naira. And here we have it. This is how much the states were able to generate by themselves, for themselves, in the entire year of 2023. Interesting. Now I will need you to know that the majority of these states, the amount they receive from the Federation Account Allocation Committee monthly is about their 2 months allocation from the Federation account is higher or equal to, relatively higher than the entire amount generated by some of these states for the entire year. Do you see the irony? In 2 months, how much you receive from the Federation account is relatively higher than how much your state generates internally for an entire year. My dear Nigerians, I'll ask us again, where really should we start working on this country called Nigeria, on our beloved country? Where is the problem? You see, we think, or we have trained our minds to assume that Nigeria starts and ends in Lagos and in Abuja. But I'm sorry to disappoint you. Nigeria lives in all of these states, all of them. And this internal generated revenue comes from taxes that the states, taxes from the states and the MDAs. What are MDAs? Ministries, departments, agencies. That's where you get your licenses, monies from permits, and other such charges. And in all, this is how much these states are generating. Nothing compared to how much they are receiving from the Federation account. There, between what they receive and what they generate, is the gap that we have to bridge as a nation. You can't keep stretching out your arms every month to collect money, and then what you are generating is nothing compared to what you receive every month. No country, prosperity around the world is not built by allocations. Prosperity is built from within. When I made a video talking about a particular state here and how at some point within 1999 to 2007 or 2003, some of the years there, how a leader in that state chose to look within when issues arose, and he said, what do we have? My dear Nigerians and Nigerian governors and state stakeholders, the time has come for us to say, what do we have? At some point in the near future, I hope that we can really look to question if this allocation disbursement is sustainable. Because there's a level of complacence that is currently, or that naturally will happen, when you know that whether you work or you don't work, whether you generate or you don't generate, you are going to collect billions monthly. And in some cases, it runs into trillions in a year. So why should you really work hard to look within and see what you can generate? These states make up Nigeria. When you're reciting the 36 states and capital, this is what you're calling. That is Nigeria. Our industries live here. Our schools live here. Infrastructure live here. Everything, they live here. So the next time somebody tells you Nigeria is not working, look the person in the face, my dear, and ask the person, what is your state producing? And how much value does your state add to the growth of this country? This is not the time to sit down and wish away that the problems of this country lies at the center in Abuja or with somebody you don't like. I've told you that your feelings really do not matter. Where governance, politics, law are concerned. What matters is logic, reality, facts, and of course the law in itself. So please, we need to start asking ourselves and our leaders, starting from the grassroots, what do we have? Until we start asking and answering those questions genuinely, we will keep running in cycles. And every other 4 years, you come up with your favorite presidential candidate and say it is this person or nothing. Meanwhile, the true solution starts from here. Here, and then we take it up. See you in my next series.